Welcome to the family, son.
Resident Evil 7 takes some big risks. Even as some succeed and others fall flat, this new first-person take on the formula wisely remembers that it's survival horror adventure and not action that makes the series memorable. With one of the creepiest single settings in a Resident Evil game since the Spencer estate and an enticingly bizarre mystery to unravel, it's the most fun I've had with the series in years. The atmosphere in Resident Evil 7 is the strongest the series has seen in a long time, and that's owed entirely to the eerie Dulvey plantation. This is Resident Evil in the tradition of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, with all the gruesome imagery, dilapidated old shacks, and cannibalistic horrors that come with it.
This was supposed to be a very special feast. My boy.
Sometimes that makes for an interesting backdrop, especially as you begin to trace the Baker family's descent into savagery and the way it's manifested in their domestic life. Other times, it relies too heavily on overplayed horror tropes about rural America and begins to border on the cartoonish. But it never fails to deliver a strong sense of place that makes frequent exploration and backtracking work without wearing out its welcome. The setting's only real failing is its puzzles, which were disappointingly rare and far too simple. The Baker family, like unstoppable tyrants with unpleasant personalities, are among the first enemies you'll encounter, and they're by far the most interesting. While that's meant as a compliment to the characters and the unpredictable encounters and boss fights they produce, it isn't good news for the rest of Resident Evil 7. Throughout my roughly 10-hour journey, just about the only other enemy type I encountered were these creatures, called the Molded. While visually repulsive and threatening enough to cause more than a couple of tense combat encounters, they lost their ability to shock me very quickly, especially because the scenarios in which you encounter them are all so similar. Most of Resident Evil's tension comes from finding yourself in tough situations and struggling to adapt, since it's all about scavenging for items and conserving what little ammo and resources you do have. I'm happy to see that core Resident Evil idea make a comeback in 7, but being forced to change up my survival tactics in the face of new, unpredictable enemies and situations would have made the experience a lot scarier. Despite the shift to first person, Resident Evil 7 feels more like an adventure game than a first-person shooter, which is a welcome return to what the series was in the 90s. Thanks to a compelling pace that ensured I always knew what I needed to do next, most of my time wandering hallways, collecting keys, and unlocking secret passageways around the Dulvey property felt well spent, especially as the central mystery unraveled around me with each file and phone call I received. The story does eventually tie into the existing lore in a way that I found rewarding to uncover as a longtime fan. The tangential relationship gives Resident Evil 7 the feeling of a reboot while still allowing it to function comfortably as a sequel. It all culminates in a mostly satisfying conclusion that leaves just enough unanswered questions for a follow-up. There are also plenty of exciting references to classic Resident Evil throughout. Things like crest doors, a weight-based puzzle to obtain the shotgun, themed keys, safe rooms, item boxes, and more. While it was nice to see many of these things at first, they occasionally felt out of place or oversimplified, shallow nods to a bygone era rather than a confident continuation of the very elements this series invented. My Resident Evil 7 experience was positive with and without the PlayStation VR. There were only a handful of sequences that I felt were designed specifically to take advantage of VR's unique capabilities, but I never felt like I was missing out on anything substantial when playing in 2D. VR makes the Resident Evil experience very different, but it is not necessarily the superior option. The one area where VR does improve the gameplay experience is combat. Because you move your crosshair by looking around, VR makes landing headshots on enemies much easier than it is on a gamepad. Resident Evil 7 grounds itself in elements that made the original great, while still indulging in a risky new shift in style that both helps and hurts the beloved formula in equal measure. But it's also the closest a numbered sequel has come to Resident Evil's slow but thrilling and atmospheric adventure game roots in a long time. A welcome return that I truly hope to see more of in the future.